Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Beyond the Big Six podcast. There is just the two of us today because we are the only two available on a Friday afternoon. Unfortunately, Niall is probably at work somewhere being busy. So I'm joined by Tony. How are you doing, Tony, on this fine September day?
Not too bad. It's lovely weather considering we're heading into the autumn and not quite used to the weather being as nice around this time of year. So yeah, that it's good.
Very good. Very British of us to talk about the weather. Um, but actually, what we're talking about is a bit of a transfer window review. We're going to look at the winners of the window, the losers of the window. We are using the athletics grades as well to sort of go through this. So we're going to look at the teams that they give the best ratings to and the teams that they gave the worst ratings to. And then a little bit of a discussion on the ones who all got like a C grade. So let's start. The Athletic gave Sunderland an A. That's the highest of the teams we cover. I think Liverpool also got an A. And I think this is an interesting one because Sunderland have obviously done a lot of business. I don't think there'll be a team in the Premier League that's probably added more players than Sunderland. On the face of it, I mean, obviously I'm going to be biased, but on the face of it, it looks like they've added like a good blend of youth and experience. I think that the standout signings probably Granit Xhaka is a standout signing. He's probably the one I think everyone in the Premier League looked at when it went through and went, really, Granit Xhaka's going to Sunderland? He's not going to maybe a West Ham or an Aston Villa or a Newcastle or one of them sort of teams at the top end of the league. He's going to Sunderland. That to me was a real sign that Sunderland meant business. But are you surprised that Sunderland have been given such a high rating?
No, I would honestly say that I was quite impressed with some of the players that they brought in. Javi Diarra, a very talented young Frenchman, um, Adingra, solid Premier League player for Brighton previously. So I think there's a good mix, like you say, and especially like say Granit Xhaka as well. I think he was the major coup of the window in the respect that nobody could see that coming from a Leverkusen team that had gone undefeated all across the season to come back to the Premier League and to take a gamble at getting going to a newly promoted club. That's a big thing. So it is a major thing for Sunderland to be able to get that deal done. But yeah, I think you've done some smart business. The right back, who I'm not even going to try and pronounce his name, from Leipzig as well. He looks a good player. So yeah, you've done quite well across the board. So yeah, I think the grading's fair.
In terms of where this leaves Sunderland, I mean, we talked about our preseason predictions. I think we both had Sunderland getting relegated. And if I was going to do my preseason prediction again, I probably would have Sunderland staying up. And I think I had Leeds staying up. So I would have Leeds going down and Sunderland going up. I think them two would probably switch around. But you, I think, are still pretty set on the newly promoted three going back down. So if Sunderland have had an almost a near perfect window, is that basically you saying that the gap between the Premier League and the Championship is so great that you can hit the nail on the head with your transfer business, but the chances are you're still going to get relegated? And what does that actually say about football if that is to happen?
I think that's the biggest difficulty. It's what do you do? Do you put all your eggs in that basket and throw the kitchen sink at it and get as many players and cover as many positions as you possibly can, but then potentially it has a knock-on effect? I mean, Sunderland have been really good in years gone by and bought cheaper players to sell on for a bigger fee and followed a model not too dissimilar. Well, a lot different to Brighton, but they've sort of followed a similar model and smartly bought and sold on high. So and they've had that PSR headroom. So it is slightly different. But we have seen teams in the past who've come up and they've spent lots of money and then struggled in years gone by. You know, over the years, there's so many examples to list that have really spent big in the Premier League, who are newly promoted, and then really went on to struggle, and it's had a knock-on effect for years to come, not just the next season. So I do think it's still a difficult question to answer that one, in the respect that yes, it might bridge that gap, but it's a big risk ultimately. Sunderland, like I say, have done a lot of smart business, and that probably would see them all right. So if they were to go down, I don't see it having quite as much of a catastrophic effect as what it has on other sides. But I do think it's still, it's still a big ask to stay up from the championship. That gap is just getting bigger and bigger. So I do think it's going to be a challenge.
So I think it's interesting because the last six newly promoted teams have all obviously went down. I think there's a lot of context around the reasons why they were relegated. So if we go through them individually, last season Ipswich went down. They spent 115 million, something like that. They bought pretty much exclusively from the Championship. They threw their eggs in baskets like Calvin Phillips. They hit the nail on the head with Liam Delap coming in, but Liam Delap was probably the only player they bought last summer that was, in my opinion, of Premier League quality. And they did it very, very differently. Leicester and Southampton. Southampton spent a lot but recruited poorly. I think we can all look at their business and say they recruited poorly. Leicester, they had loads of issues. They lost some of their best players when they got promoted. So they were weaker than what they were in the Championship. Then the year before, Luton didn't spend. Did all right, to be fair, but didn't really spend. They brought in Ross Barkley, who was a bit of a game changer for them, didn't spend. You had them with Burnley, who are probably the one you would link closest to Sunderland in terms of Burnley spent a lot of money and brought in loads of players. But again, the difference between that Burnley team and that Sunderland team is that Burnley's manager was set on playing away in a way that is not beneficial to a newly promoted team. Then you had Sheffield United, who were in absolute shambles and got relegated and were possibly, I know their points total doesn't say it, but their points total was absolutely horrific. But the year before that, all three newly promoted teams stayed up. And I think that a lot of pundits are looking at Sunderland and Leeds and Burnley. I'm going to group them all together because I think they've all got a chance of staying up. But they're all looking at the three of them going, well, they are going to follow the same path of these other newly promoted teams. And I think that the context around the other six is so different to what these three are doing. Sunderland in particular, I think Sunderland they've got a manager who's a bit more pragmatic and does not have a set style. He's not married to passing it out from the back. He's not married to this is my way or the highway like a Russell Martin or well, pretty much all the other managers who've come up in the last few years. He's a little bit different, and I think Sunderland as well. Bringing in Gasolfi from Roma, they brought in obviously a top level sporting director. They I think you can see that they've had a plan for what they're going to do. I mean, I don't know if you saw the Leeds managing director yesterday was talking about Sunderland and what they were able to do in the transfer market, and he was like, they didn't spend in the Championship because for this reason, when they get up, they could spend £200 million. They sold players like Job and Tommy Watson for massive amounts of profit. It felt like Sunderland had a really sort of different plan. They'd learned from the mistakes of the recently six promoted teams. And I just think that there's a narrative that is almost, I don't want to say it's lazy, but it's a narrative that's really easy to follow that essentially is you come up from the Championship, the last six teams have went down, therefore these three teams that have went up have basically got no hope. And I don't think that's fair because I think that there's so much context around them six. And I think that teams, Sunderland and Ipswich, they might have spent similar amounts of money, but they have spent it in completely different ways. And I just think there's in the football world there's narratives that exist, and I don't necessarily agree with them. I know that's a lot of information I've thrown at you there, but there you are. Dissect it, feed it back, and we'll move on to Nottingham Forest after this.
Yeah, you've got a point in the respect that it, again, like I said, there's that much different like styles of doing things and different ways of doing things. Everybody's looking for the way that works. All these newly promoted sides are looking for the game changer that's going to bring them up to the level and close that gap. And fingers crossed that one of the sides or all three of the sides have found that answer to be able to bridge that gap and m- like break into the Premier League and be established. But it's one of the most difficult things in the world to do. So we'll see. Time will tell, and you might be right. You might prove us wrong, and what both of our predictions come the end of the season might be drastically wrong, but only time will tell.
Yeah, I mean, I did have Sunderland going down, so there we go. I did have Leeds staying up though. Anyway, right, let's talk about Nottingham Forest. They were given the next best grade, and this one kind of, in a little way, it sort of threw me a little bit. Nottingham Forest having such a high grade, but then I looked at their business and I was like, you know what? Like, yes, they've lost Elanga, who was obviously a big player for them. They lost Danilo, who's been a decent player for them. They've lost a couple other fringe players, but actually they've added a lot of what I would consider to be potential first team players. Amari Hutchinson's come in. I thought he was decent. He was one of the shining lights at Ipswich last season. Dan and Doy, he already looks pretty good. They brought him in from Bologna. Dylan Bakwa, easy for me to say. He's coming from Strasbourg. He seems like an exciting player. Kalimundo's come in from Rennes. James McAtee's coming from Man City. Igor Jesus has came in. He's looked good this season. Nicolo Savono's come in. Jay Cunha's come in. John Victor's come in. I mean, it's getting so long. Douglas Ruiz is coming on loan. Zinchenko's coming on loan. I mean, it's a lot of players, basically. I've not even read the full list there.
Yeah.
A lot of players have come in, and I look at it and I go, do you know what? They've got Europe this season, and a lot of people are using that as a stick to beat them with and say, not sure if they'll be able to cope with both. But I think Forest have done really, really well to add to this team and get it ready to play an extra at least 8 games this season.
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen from Ndoye already. He looks as though he's hit the ground running. He's already got a goal and a couple of assists, I believe. So Hutchinson is again, like you said, last season was really good for Ipswich. So they've got a lot of good talent in there. And James McAtee, I think possibly could go in a similar sort of way to what the likes of Cole Palmer did, in the respect that they just need that first team opportunity. I bang on about him a lot, but Elliot Anderson, coming from Newcastle and going to Nottingham Forest, he's getting the first team experience. He looks absolutely brilliant. And I think that's what some of these players need now. That there is a lot of talented players coming in there, and it is very Nottingham Forest to bring in like 30 odd players and change the squad around and hope that something sticks. But that there's still a lot of uncertainty around the manager and things as well. So could that play a factor in the coming weeks and months? Who knows? But yeah, they've quietly done some really good business. So I'm really impressed with who they've brought in.
Yeah, I feel like Forest's only enemy at the moment is Forest themselves. That's like the only thing that can unstick this Forest progression is their owner and the manager and what's happening with that situation. Obviously, lost 3-0 last weekend against West Ham, which was a bit of a blow. But yeah, I'm pretty optimistic Forest will be top 8 or 9
Mm.
this season after seeing what they've done. Everton and Brighton, they both got Bs. We'll start with Everton. I mean, we talked about this on the last episode, but I love what Everton have done with their forward line. Grealish, I'm so excited about seeing Grealish in the way that he's played in the opening couple of games. He looks like the Grealish of old, and I'm just a big fan of him. He's one of my favourite players to watch when he was at Aston Villa. He's got like personality on the ball. He's one of them players you don't see as much these days where players don't have as much personality. I feel like sort of 20 years ago, individual players had a certain style of playing and you'd watch games and players were different. Whereas now there's a little bit of a feeling that players are a bit more robotic and a bit more they're so technically gifted, they kind of all play in a similar manner. Dewsbury Hall's come in. That's a good move. They've added Barry and Dibling as well, which are good options for the future to progress. And it feels like Everton have kind of future-proofed themselves by bringing in young players, but have also, by adding in Grealish and Dewsbury Hall, they've just added really exciting attacking players. So I'm really excited about Everton's attacking line this season. I don't know where it ranks in the Premier League, but are you as high on Everton's summer business?
Yeah, absolutely. Grealish is a breath of fresh air. He really is. He looks like the Grealish of old, like you say. So I think they're really getting a player there. We didn't know which way it was going to go, a bit unsure whether we would, get back to his best. But it certainly looks as though David Moyes is getting the best out of him. So hats off to him. Uh, Dewsbury Hall, I said from the start, I thought it was a cracking signing for replace Decore. he really fits in that mold, and he's comfortable on the ball. He can set the pace. He's just a decent midfielder, and I'm surprised others didn't try and get him, if I'm honest. Uh, Barry, we've not really seen much of him in terms of the league at the moment, but I think it's early days, and he's a talented young player, so there's nothing to say that he'd come off good as well. Tyler Dibling from Southampton, he was really good in the few matches that I saw him play last season. So there's a lot to be optimistic about if you're an Everton fan.
Yeah, new stadium as well, which is obviously nice. They got off to a good start against Brighton, which is the next team we're going to talk about. They've been given a B. For me, this is a lot of unknowns at Brighton. I feel like it's trust in their recruitment being so good. Like, I'm not going to lie. Charlampos Costulis, who they've brought in for 35 million euros, an 18-year-old from Olympiacos. I do not know much about him. Maxim Kuiper, it's a decent left back they've brought in from Club Brugge. Tommy Watson they've brought in from Sunderland. And look, obviously I know a lot about Tommy Watson, but can I say for sure he's a Premier League winger? No, he played like 12 games in the Championship last season. Obviously scored a pretty important goal in the playoff final. But yeah, can I say that he's going to be an upgrade on Adingra, who they've lost? I'm not 100% sure. Diego Capola's come in from Hellas Verona, 21-year-old centre back. Du Young from the Korean League. Again, can I say I know much about him? No. And Olivier Pascagli, who I do know from Football Manager, free transfer from PSV. Looks like a decent bit of business. But it's really hard. They've lost a couple of players as well. João Pedro's went, Dingra's left, Enciso's left, Estepinian's left, Barco's left, Lamptey's left, Abdul Nasima's left, Evan Ferguson's left on loan, Buonotti's went to Chelsea, Matt O'Reilly's went to Marseille. They've lost like quite a few players, it's fair to say. And I think the trust is that this Brighton recruitment team will have got it right because they generally seem to. So are you surprised that they've rated as a B?
A little bit, I must admit, because there is a smattering of decent players in there. You know, Costulis is a bit of a mystery for me as well. De Kuyper looks as though he's been a good signing. I know he scored at the weekend there. Well, not the weekend, sorry, earlier in the week for Belgium. So he looks a talented player. Again, Tommy Watson, young lad. Is he going to hit the heights that maybe Adingra might? I don't know. There's a lot of question marks there. But overall, they've done all right. In Brighton have a habit of unearthing talent and then selling on big. So maybe that's the angle they're going at again with some of these players. They've got extensive scouting networks, so maybe these have been recruited for that purpose. You know, in terms of Do Young Yoon, is it to similar to a Matoma? You know, picking up a player from maybe or a Baleba where it's a lesser known sort of area, and they're bringing them in and you know selling high in years to come. We'll have to wait and see. But I do think the grading is slightly high for me, but Brighton are the masters at this thing, so I would expect to be proved wrong in the next couple of months.
Yeah, I think the key as well is they haven't lost anyone they weren't willing to lose. Like they knew that Pedro was going to go. Baleba was obviously linked with Man United, but they held firm there. So they've kept the players they wanted to keep, and they've brought in more young talent. Right, we're going to talk about Newcastle now, and we could talk about sagas and everything else with Isak and Vissa, but I don't want to talk about sagas. Talk about the context of whether or not that impacted Newcastle's summer, because I personally think they did overpay on Voltmaid and Visser. And that's probably where I marked Newcastle down. I think actually overall, you look at the depth in what they've added to the squad, and they actually ticked off pretty much every box they wanted to tick off ahead of the summer. They needed to add in a right winger. They've done that. They needed to add in a backup striker for Isak, and obviously they've had to buy two strikers, but they have done that. They've got themselves in a better position going forward in terms of numbers. They've added Ramsey into midfield, who I think is an interesting signing and is somebody that I quite like the look of. Chiao coming in at centre back, that's a player that they've tracked for a while. I don't think he is at this moment in time, good enough to be Newcastle's starting centre back. But that isn't to say that he won't get there in the next year or so. Eddie Howe is obviously such a proven manager when it comes to developing players, and I think that's the one thing that I would say is exciting about their incomings. Is I look at all the players they've brought in. Vault made clearly very raw still and needs tuning, but you can do that with Howe. Elanga's the same. Vissa is a proven commodity in the Premier League. Ramsey could maybe do with a little bit of polish, and Chow could do with a little bit of polishing up. So I think that's the one thing I would say that all these players, in theory, should improve at Newcastle, which will probably make this transfer window look better in a couple of years' time. But in terms of the incomings, are you happy with what Newcastle have done?
The saga aside, yeah, absolutely. They've set out to address a lot of long-term issues, and they have. So, that right wing literally had Jacob Murphy and obviously Almiron until he left. So that needed addressed. Right centre back needed addressed for since the takeover went through, really. So I'm glad that's been addressed as well. There's a lot more cover. There's a lot more depth there. Um, always slightly weaker, possibly. You know, you lose a world class talent, you're always going to be that little bit less like potent up front in that respect. But I'm quietly pleased with what the business that we've done. It'll be interesting to see how Voltemada like adapts to the Premier League. Will he hit the ground running? I know certainly Isak, he didn't really, he did come in against Liverpool and he did score, but it took him a while to kind of get into his first season he only scored 10 goals. So in Callum Wilson kind of lightened the load in the respect he scored the majority of our goals that season. So I think that might work quite well in the respect that you've got Wissa, who is a proven Premier League goal scorer, so he can come in and he can do that and possibly take a bit of the emphasis off Voldemara until he's been Eddie Howe, shall we say. Um, but yeah, I'm quietly quite positive about the business that we've done. I would have liked another midfielder in because I think we could do with the cover there. But all has been addressed, so quietly happy about it.
Yeah, I would agree. And certainly you look at the outgoings. Obviously, if Newcastle keep Alexander Isak and he's happy, and they do all this business beyond one of the strikers that they've brought in, you would say it's been a perfect window. It's just the asterisk next to it is Alexander Isak is obviously a top 10, top 5 maybe striker in the world. They've lost him, and they've replaced him with players that I know Vissa, for example, is proven in the Premier League to an extent, but the system that they play at Brentford is not going to be the same sort of system that he's going to play in at Newcastle. And Voltmade coming in, he's a bit of an unknown. I'm a bit worried about that being a player that's had a hot sort of end to the season, and you've paid a large amount of money. So yeah, I think Newcastle will probably be overall pretty pleased with it, other than the Isak situation. But the Isak situation also helps because long term, PSR, those 3 letters, Newcastle should be able to do good business like next summer, you would think.
Absolutely, but I'll just point out that you did say that you thought that Isak's initial transfer to Newcastle was a bit of a gamble as well. So to caveat that, Voltemara could be a good player. I'm not going to put my eggs in that basket though, because I was a bit more confident in the Isak, yeah, transfer. I kind of thought
But
I've
do you
seen
think
enough.
that Isak to me looked like it was someone that was like a long term target and they got, whereas I don't know if you could say the same about Voltmardy.
I mean, apparently we have been scouting him, and in the background behind it was that obviously Bayern were kind of lurking in the background, and they had made 3 bids and they had been rejected. So it was the club's understanding that he wasn't for sale. But then things changed. They put the bid in and it was accepted. So obviously got to the fee that Stuttgart were after. But yeah, I don't know how it'll pan out, but he does look an exciting player. He's got good feet. He's very different to, yes, he's 6'6", but from everything that I've read and the videos that I've watched, he's very different to the average kind of target man that he would kind of be cast as in any other iteration of football. He's very good with his feet. He's relatively quick. He's a playmaker as well. So he's more of a deep lying forward. I think he's drawn a few comparisons to Harry Kane. Obviously, hasn't got the goals that he has, but there's a lot of the coming deep to get the ball and playing others in and creating the opportunities for others. It's just unfortunately at Stuttgart he hasn't really had the players around him who are capable of putting the ball in the back of the net or making the most of the set opportunities. Hopefully, coming to Newcastle, he'll have that support and the likes of Gordon and Elanga and people around him who are also great players, as well as likes of Tonali who is just absolutely phenomenal. So I do. He's obviously been brought in for his potential and that high ceiling that he's got. So let's hope he can fulfil that. Well, that's amazing Newcastle fan. I hope he can fulfil that.
Okay, bad windows. So this is kind of me really interjecting this because the Athletic gave Leeds a C, but I feel like Leeds had done like 2/3 of a brilliant window and 1/3 a bad window because I think that goal we talked about this in the last podcast, but basically their goalkeeper, the defense, and the midfield, I really like. Anton Stack, I think, is a good player. We'll probably end up at a top six Premier League team or a top team in Europe within the next couple of years. I think it's a good signing. Xhaka Biol, that's an upgraded centre back for them. Lucas Perry come in from Lyon, good goalkeeper, certainly better than Ilan Melier. Sean Longstaff is a decent, experienced Premier League central midfielder, good for any bottom half Premier League team. I mean, he's been good for Newcastle and they've been in the Champions League. Gabriel Goodmanson, left back, decent signing. They've also it's just the forward line. Like Dominic Calvert-Lewin, I think he's scored 12 goals in the last 3 seasons. It's just not. It's been a while since he's been a real threat in the Premier League. Jack Harrison's come back in from Everton. Obviously, he was on loan there. I'm not massive on him as a Premier League player. They've also got Dan James, who I don't think has proven in the Premier League. Willie Nonto, who, to be honest, I think's regressed over the last couple of years. And I just look at that final third. I've watched Leeds all three of their games this season, and they just don't look like scoring a goal in open play. And to me, I look at the other promoted teams, Sunderland and Burnley, and they actually do look like scoring a little bit from open play. Both have scored from open play this season. Leeds haven't yet. And I just think they've done 2/3 of a job. They've said that they've spent the most they possibly could spend. But then I look at James Justin for 10 million quid, and I'm like, if you are at your PSR limit, why are you spending 10 million on a cover left back when you could have got Harry Wilson on deadline day for 10 million? It makes absolutely no sense to me. So I think they've left themselves short on the final third. And I think that they'll look at this and go, well, that's probably why, if they get relegated, why they've been relegated. So I've been pretty, in a lot of ways, impressed with Leeds. I love what they've done 2/3 of the way. I just think the final third is absolutely going to murder them this season. They're not going to score enough goals.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that in the respect that they've signed all of these players in all the other positions in the pitch, and they've really left themselves relatively short up front. Nemecha, I, is one of those players who've come from Wolfsburg, and he was all right over there. He wasn't prolific. He was just an all right sort of player. Calvert Lewin, I know obviously we spoke about him last time. He has the potential to be a goal scorer, and he has done it where he scored 10 goals in a season. But keeping him fit and getting that consistency, like he doesn't seem to get into a rhythm. And I think if you kind of get into that groove of scoring goals and being in the right positions, and he almost looks like he's forcing chances and snatching at them when he's taking shots and things. I don't know if he's the answer. But like you say, across the squad, they've like we spoke about Anton Stack before. He looks a really solid player. He looks and I would totally agree with the fact that potentially if Leeds are to go down, he goes on to go to either another European club or certainly a Premier League club. Um, Noah Okafor, I feel has been around a hell of a long time. I don't know if I don't know about you. I seem to remember him being a thing on Football Manager at one point, and he just I can't believe he's 25. I'm a bit surprised by that, if I'm honest. But he's a bit of an unknown. Willie Nonto, like you say, he he seemed to explode onto the scene initially, and he got called up to the Italy squad, and there was big things expected of him, but it just doesn't seem to have happened. I think he was kind of expecting a bigger club or like a European club to come in for him, and it just never happened. So I think you're right in the respect that that forward line just doesn't look strong enough. Where are the goals coming from? Uh, it's hard to say. It really is. So yes, outside of the front line, I think they've done some really good business, but that front line's going to prove problematic. I would think.
Yeah, they've really struggled to get rid of players. Like Melly is still on the books at Leeds. Like, how is that happening? They've still got Brendan Aronson on the books. They've still got obviously Jack Harrison on the books as well. And I think on Nonto, he actually had the chance to move when they got relegated, and I think he went on strike a couple of years ago. So I think Everton or West Ham were after him a couple of years ago, and he obviously didn't get that move. And I think he has sort of regressed a little bit as a player. And I just, as we've said, you've got to score basically 45 goals to have a chance of staying up with the Premier League. I don't see where 45 goals come from in that Leeds team. Admittedly, they will keep clean
Mm.
sheets, but it's not going to be enough to stay up unless your clean sheet record is outrageous and you're keeping 20 of them. Anyway, Aston Villa. These got a D from the Athletic, and there is no team, I think, in football right now who are hurting when it comes to finances and PSR and all that lovely stuff than Aston Villa, because they've still got a really strong squad, but just feels like it's constantly being picked at. They didn't lose a massive player this summer. Jacob Ramsey obviously went, but he's not like somebody Villa were um, relying on to, like when they lost Douglas Luiz, he was the heartbeat of the team, and they've lost other players like that. Dior, we know they lost as well. They haven't lost anyone like that this summer, but that's meant that they've not really been able to do much in terms of incomes. Evan Gessant's come in from Nice. Lindelof on a free transfer from Man United just reeks of we don't have money to spend. Bezos came in from Brest. Harvey Elliott on loan, Jaden Sancho on loan. Elliott, I think it's a decent pickup. Sancho, there's lots of question marks over that one. I think they were relying on Emi Martinez leaving, I think, and obviously he stays, which if he plays is obviously a big win because he's one of the best goalkeepers in the league. But I think their transfer business relied on him going and relied on him going earlier in the window. So I think there's lots of question marks about Villa. Have they got better this summer? I don't know if they have. The squad's still very strong, and they've had a bad start of the season, but they'll obviously come out of that. They look still like a very decent team, but it just feels like they're stuck. They're very stale right now, just because of PSR and the money that they've spent in the past.
Yeah, again, I agree with that. We haven't seen the best of Villa at all this season. We really haven't. Uh, like you say, where Lindelof's concerned, it does look a bit desperate. Was he ever really a top player at Man United? I think he was a bit of a gap filler, really. Harvey Elliott, I do think, is a bit of a shrewd buy, especially at the price tag that he is at. I think he'll do well for them. Sancho, we've not really seen the player that came from Dortmund yet. I don't know where he disappeared to. A young young England international who was very talented and would really take the game to an opponent, but we're yet to really see that in the Premier League. So it'll be interesting to see if Unai can get a tune out of him. And that big hammer blow of kind of not being able to do the business because you're not shedding a player. But not losing Martinez could prove to be pretty good. In all honesty, coming from like that goalkeeper department, which is really integral, to the squad. The hardest thing in football to do is stop goals and score them, and he's one of the very best at stopping them. So, yes, it's a bit of a pain because they haven't been able to do the business that they've wanted to do, but he is a phenomenal goalkeeper, and it could be a bit of a saving grace in the long run.
Wolves, it feels like losing Cunha and Eight Nori and the players that they've brought in this summer, it's hard to say that they've got any better. That's the fundamental issue because they've lost two, top level Premier League players, and I we can't say that they've brought in top level Premier League players. And obviously, some of these players, John Arias, he might turn into a top player, but he's 27 years old. I don't think we're going to see him as a elite top level Premier League winger. I don't think that'll happen. Chacho has come in right back. Wolf, who we all enjoyed on social media. He's come in left back from AZ Alkmaar. They've also brought in Ladislav Krejci from Girona. Fer Lopez has come in from Celta Vigo, who I think could be an exciting bit of business. And Tolu Arakode from Genk. That was a deadline day move, I think, for 27 million euros. I struggle to see Wolves being better this season than they were last season, which is probably why the Athletics given them a D minus. They've had a bad start to the season as well. It just feels like Wolves are treading water at best right now.
I mean, Ait Nori and Matheus Cunha are two phenomenal players, which is why they're no longer at Wolves, unfortunately. But to lose them in your squad, it's always going to sting because they're very hard players to replace. Them keeping hold of Jorgen Strand Larsen is a big thing, mind. He has goals in him, so you have a goal threat there. Have they done enough? I I don't think so, and I think they're one of the sides who will be long term looking over their shoulder, and they're something that the sides that have come up from the championship can aspire to kind of think we're going to reel these guys in. So it'll be interesting to see in the coming weeks and months how the business in the summer has affected them, and will they go back into the market in January? Because based on what I'm looking at, yeah, probably need to do so.
Yeah, historically slow starters as well, Wolves, to be fair, so they might improve. They've also historically a team that is willing to pull the trigger if things aren't going well. And I'm pretty sure they play Leeds and Sunderland in the next sort of 5 games. So that will be very interesting. That'll probably give us an indication as to whether or not Wolves are as bad as they look right now. We'll cut through all the other teams we've not mentioned so far. We'll start with West Ham, I think, because they obviously had a really bad start to the season. They weren't having a great window. I think they've kind of rescued it, bringing in Mateus Fernandes from Southampton. I think he looks like a really good player. El Hadji Malik Diouf's come in, young player from Slavia Prague, left back, left winger. Mads Hermansen, the goalkeeper from Leicester, not massively convinced on him. Magassar has come in from Monaco, defensive midfielder. Kyle Walker-Peters has come in. Callum Wilson's come in. Igor Julio's come in on loan from Brighton. So I feel like West Ham's had like a meh window. They've lost obviously Kudus, which is probably it is a blow for them losing a player of his quality. So I feel like West Ham have just sort of done okay. I don't think they've done anything particularly exciting. Probably feeling better about them because they won against Nottingham Forest last time out as well.
Yeah, there's certainly a feel good factor at this moment in time with that result because, like I said in the previous pod, winning at Forest isn't easily done in recent times anyway. But yeah, Mateus Fernandes, it looks as though he's been a bit of a game changer for them. He's come into that midfield and he looks as though he's right at home straight away, alongside Paqueta. So I do feel as though he's been a good signing for them. Malik El Hadj Diouf, it certainly looks like a decent enough player as well. So quietly they've done all right. I wouldn't say they've done absolutely incredible, but like you say, the kind of it's a bit of a middle of the road one. You know, it could go either way, but it looks to me like they've done all right.
Bournemouth, an interesting window for them because they obviously have lost so many like really top players. Saboni's went to PSG for 63 million euros. Howson's went to Real Madrid. Kirkes has went to Liverpool. Atara's went to Brentford. They've also lost a few others: Jaden Anthony, Philip Billen, Mark Travers, Chris Mepham, Joe Rothwell. But yeah, they lost a lot of really good players. But I think from what I've seen of them so far this season, they don't look like they're necessarily going to massively regress. They brought in Diakite from Lille for 35 million euros. Petrovic, good goalkeeper, is coming from Chelsea. Ben Dokes coming from Liverpool. I'm excited about him. Thought he was really good last season in the Championship. Amin Adli is coming from Bayer Leverkusen. He's a player that Sunderland were linked with as well. Mislavjevic is coming from Red Star, 18-year-old defender. Trufe is coming from Rennes, who looks like a Premier League level left back. So it looks like they've done pretty good business largely. Have they improved? Really difficult to say when they've lost that level of player, but I think their manager's so good that it doesn't really matter, does it?
Think he definitely compensates. You know, he's a bit of a game changer in terms of. I think he almost has that ability to improve what he's got. So a lot of the players that he's been able to bring through and improve. So yeah, much like what you said, they haven't done anything groundbreaking, but they've just done some good, consistent business. And I'll say it again. I really like that Bournemouth side. They're a really good, strong team, and I think the big thing that it wasn't transfer business was keeping Semenyo. I think that was a massive thing for them because he's a very talented, strong player. You know, so yeah, I think they've done all right again. You know, they haven't done it fantastic. They've not pulled up any trees, but they've they've certainly done all right.
Brentford obviously had a really hectic summer there. I saw Keith Andrews after the game against Sunderland. He talked about how difficult the summer had been. They lost Mbumo, they've lost Vissa, they've lost Norgard, they've lost Flecken. Ben Mee, who I always thought was a decent player for them, he's left as well, though he is 35. Wow, he's 35. Crazy. I remember when he was like a youngster coming through at Man City. In terms of players in, Atara's coming from Bournemouth. That looks like a really good bit of business. Malambo's coming from Feyenoord. Kiyode, who I think is a really good player. He's coming from Fiorentina. Kelleher from Liverpool. Jordan Henderson's come in. Reece Nelson's come in as well. And look, again, it's hard to say that with losing the players and the manager that they've had, that Brentford are better. I certainly don't think they are, but I think they've actually done okay business. I don't think that their business has been particularly bad. You are always likely when you are Brentford to lose your best players. They did really well to hold on to Mbumo and Vissa and Norgard for as long as they did. Um, I think they're going to be in trouble though, and I suppose that probably means. I mean, the Athletics giving them a C. That's probably a fair grade, but it's hard to see them matching what they've done in previous years with the change of manager and what's happened with the squad.
Well, essentially, they've lost nearly 40 goals from their side from last year, so that's nigh on impossible to get back. Ouattara looks good, and he looked good at Bournemouth, but is he a consistent goal scorer? I wouldn't say so. Shada again, like I wasn't 100% sold on him. He's a good player, but his fitness has been a bit of a worry, and he hasn't really scored consistently in the Premier League. So I think there's a lot of questions there again. So yeah, I think to see is fair because they have replaced players, and you know they're not they don't really have any massive gaps. Although the striking department possibly could do with somebody, but will they go into the market in the January window and possibly pick somebody up to remedy that? Possibly, if they're languishing down at the bottom the table, they certainly might look into that, especially if they're struggling.
Yeah, they'll have bundles of PSR room, so they could spend if they wanted to. Right, Burnley, they were given a B minus. Probably should have went in the good windows really at the start, but there we are. I didn't put them in there. Um, They've brought in Ugachukwu from Chelsea. That's their biggest spend, 28 million euros. Broja's come in. They brought in a lad from Lazio, Chichona's come in, Bashir Humphreys has come in, Hartman's come in, who looks like a decent player from Feyenoord, Marcus Edwards they've made permanent, Jaden Anthony made permanent, Zine Fleming made a permanent deal, Jacob Brun-Larsen, who they had a couple of years ago, he's back, Max Weeb's come in as a cover goalkeeper, Florentino's coming from Benfica, Axel Twanzebi's came in on a free, Kyle Walker's came in, Martin Dubravka's came in, it's a lot of ins. In terms of outs, James Trafford, obviously the big one. They've also lost CJ Egan Riley, who was a massive part of the defence last season. And they also lost, on top of that, Josh Brownhill, who still somehow does not have a club, amongst a few other deals. So, how do we grade Burnley? And I suppose I would put them in the middle of Sunderland and Leeds. I think Sunderland had the best window of the three. I think Burnley probably snuck ahead of Leeds because even though I'm not convinced that Broja is necessarily the answer, I have more faith in them getting a tune out of Broja than I do Leeds getting a tune out of Calvert-Lewin. I just think Calvert-Lewin, it's been so long and at his age, he's far more developed. Whereas Broja, there's context around him about why he's not done as well. So I have more faith that Broja will do better. I still worry about them scoring goals. They are going to be defensively strong, much like Leeds. Have they done enough to survive? That'll be the main question. I don't know. But where do you see this Burnley team?
Yeah, between the two promoted sides, I think you've got that spot on. I don't think to me, they haven't really done enough to stay up. They have certainly improved, but I think it's going to be a step too far. I really do. Um, they have brought an awful lot of players in. Broya, again, the jury's out on him. He had a fantastic season once upon a time at Southampton, but we've not really seen that for a good couple of years now. He didn't have a great time at Everton. He hasn't had a good time for the past couple of clubs he's been at. So I just think they've put a lot of eggs in that basket, and I don't know if that's going to pay off or not. They could prove us wrong. He could prove us wrong, but I just don't see it.
Yeah, it's a lot of money to spend on someone that I think it's what at least three, might even be 4 seasons since he had a good time of it. So
Mm.
yeah, difficult for the newly promoted teams, and I think it's just hard to find proven goal scorers, and I don't think any of them have got a proven goal scorer. Anyway, Fulham. Not lots to talk about with Fulham, which is why we've left them second last. They've brought in Kevin on deadline day for 40 million euros. They've brought in a loan from Bayern Munich, 18-year-old striker Kusi Asari. They've brought in a cover goalkeeper in Benjamin Lecomte. Samuel Chukwueze has come in from AC Milan, and outgoings, basically in terms of first team players, Andreas Pereira's left. Nothing really to say is there about Fulham. Just steady.
I mean, Samuel Chukwueze is a decent player, a definitely decent winger. So I do think that's a good signing. But largely, it's similar to kind of that West Ham where they've done all right. You know, they haven't done anything majorly wrong, but nothing that really moves the needle.
Nothing wrong with necessarily a quiet summer. I think Fulham are pretty stable, and they will argue they've probably got better because they've not really lost anyone. So yeah, it's just a sort of so window. We'll finish off though with Crystal Palace. They bought in Jeremy Pino from Villarreal for 30 million euros, Shady Canvot, centre back from Toulouse, Borna Sosa's coming from Ajax, Walter Benitez is coming from PSV, and they've also loaned in Kristantas Uchi from, I think I've said that right, Getafe on loan. In terms of outgoings, they lost Eze, they lost Eduard, somehow got 3.7 million euros for Eduard, who was absolutely hopeless last season at Leicester. But they kept Mark Gay, which is obviously the big one, I suppose, for Crystal Palace. But he's probably going to be pretty upset that he didn't get his move. Be interesting to see what happened there. Reports that Glasgow wasn't happy as well towards the end of the window that they didn't get enough in, especially now they've got Europe to contend with. It feels like could be tricky for Crystal Palace to keep up with the Thursday, Sunday, unlike Nottingham Forest, who I think have probably built a squad more for it. But I think Palace will be fine. They're obviously weaker because they've lost Eze, but sort of is what it is. How do you see Palace?
There's a lot of dark energy around, like bad vibes around Crystal Palace, isn't there? You know, the fact that they were demoted into the Conference League, there's that. Then the there was like a bit of a moment on Sky with the manager and Mark Gahey, and that was made a big thing out of it. You know, where he tried to wave him across, and Gahey just kind of shrugged him off and went off in a different direction. But Glasner always said that Gay's integral to the squad. We need to keep him, and you know, especially losing you're losing another really important player in the team. Can any team really afford to lose two really influential players in their squad? Probably not. So, you know, I do think they've done some decent business in the respect that they have replaced some players, and they've kept Matata, who I think is a really good forward. So I do think that they've done all right, but where that depth's concerned, that might be where, especially playing that Thursday Sunday, it might take its toll.
Okay, well, that sums up. I think we've talked about every team there, and I apologise if we've missed anyone. Such as the amazing professionalism and planning here. I'm pretty sure we've covered everyone though, apart from those dastardly big six teams. So anyway, Tony, thanks for joining me and talking through these transfers. We'll be back with a prediction podcast in the next few days. And as a spoiler, we are all not doing all that great on the predictions so far. So maybe we're not worth listening to. Right. Thanks everyone for listening. We'll catch you very soon for the next episode.